This is the Norris Group's Real Estate Investor Radio Show, the award-winning show dedicated to thought leaders shaping the real estate industry and local experts revealing their insider tips to succeed in an ever-changing real estate market. Hosted by author, investor, and hard money lender, Bruce Norris.
Hey everybody, it is Aaron Norris with the Norris Group, and today we are here with Paul Herrera. He is the head of legislation for the Inland Valley Association of Realtors, among other association of realtors in Southern California. And we're here today to talk specifically about AB 828, making a lot of headlines as the bill that would reduce rents by 25% in California, which is a big concern. And Paul, you're going to have to fill us in on this because this sounds fake.
Sure. It is one of the wildest intrusions that the legislature has considered into any industry, much less the rental industry that I've ever seen. And I don't want to be alarmist about it because it's actually quite a bit more complicated than just the headline 25% reduction in rents. I think that argument is too simple for what it actually does. And so, whenever you're ready, I can start going into the details.
Yeah, let's do it. Talk about where this came from. It seems like it came out of the blue. And one of the things that's so frustrating is you've got the state, federal, the state, and then you've got all these municipalities doing their own separate thing, which is really difficult to follow, especially if you're a landlord that owns properties in multiple areas. You really have to be plugged in at all three of those levels.
So 828 does several things. I'm going to start with the easy stuff and then come to the 25% reduction and how complicated that gets. So the easy stuff is that AB 828 would introduce a moratorium on any official actions related to foreclosures, tax default sales, and evictions throughout the period of the state of emergency plus 15 days after the emergency ends. On its face, when it comes to evictions, that hardly even matters because the State Judicial Council last week passed a moratorium not allowing courts to be involved in unlawful detainers for 90 days after the emergency is declared over. So you would think, okay, 15 days, that would be an improvement from where we are. There's a very important caveat to that. The Judicial Council order applies to the state of California's emergency declaration. AB 828 would include any emergency declaration that covers the area where the property is located, including city declarations and county declarations. So you can imagine a scenario in which maybe the state ends the emergency declaration in May or June, but city of Los Angeles, Santa Monica, Oakland, whoever, just keeps extending that. State of emergency can last for years. This one would have a final sunset of January 1st of 2022. That's 19 months from now. So you could have a scenario in which you are not receiving rent and cannot take any action to evict for the next 20 months, 19 months. And then, you're looking at 2 years of receiving no rent and not being able to take any action if a city or the state were to just keep extending the state of emergency. So that's one area of concern. Does that all make sense? Any questions there?
No, I was going to immediately ask, whose state of emergency is the most important? And, immediately I'm starting to think about all the different players underneath a landlord that has finance involved. And I think one of the most offensive things that happened this month is watching the Newsom sort of announced, thank you counties for playing ball. And the county's press release that they put out basically said, yeah, your property taxes are still due, but every county may or may not waive late fees because if you stop paying, we're insolvent. It's offensive because on the backs of property owners, they're expecting us to absorb that and not just us looking down into the trail of property managers, repair people. You've got all the lenders involved. I mean, I just don't understand how they have a leg to stand on when it comes to this.
Well, there's quite a bit of panic taking place right now at a number of levels in trying to figure out just how bad this goes and where the money comes from to fund basic operations of government. So I don't think it's that well thought through. And you can imagine there's so much going on at the moment that people are just trying to get through this week, or maybe to the end of the day at times.
Yeah.
I mean, the good news about this piece of legislation is that it has gone absolutely nowhere. There are no votes scheduled. It's not even assigned. Well, it's assigned to a committee, but it's not going to be in that committee because a year ago, this legislation passed a state assembly as a human trafficking bill. It was deleted and rewritten about 2 weeks ago as a rental bill. So it's got to essentially restart the process.
I got to stop you right there because how do you compare a human trafficking bill with a real estate bill? Those are so different. So what do they have to do with each other? And how could you just sort of repurpose?
Oh, nothing.
What?
Yeah, they've got. This is just a process. At this stage in the legislative calendar, this is year 2 of a 2-year legislative session. You're not allowed to introduce a brand new piece of legislation fresh. The only way you can bring new ideas into the discussion is to take an old bill that has moved through the process, delete the language, and put in new language. It still has to go back to the assembly. Like the fact that it passed the assembly as a human trafficking bill with the same letters and numbers does not allow it to then pass the Senate, and now it's going to go to the governor's office. It has to go back to the assembly to hash out the differences.
Okay.
The assembly can't write a blank check. Yeah. So don't worry that it passed the Senate, the assembly passed it, and like, okay, we're good. No, they have to go back and approve the fact that the bill was changed completely into something new.
Okay, that's what I was curious about. So this is the old AB 828 it's now just all the language is updated to be about this instead of the human. Got it. Okay.
Correct. It's gone. The old language is gone. But the key is that there is no vote scheduled. So right now, the California Apartment Association, the California Association of Realtors are asking members to reach out to senators that represent them, urging them to oppose the legislation. At the moment, it's kind of hard to get the attention of lawmakers on any given piece of legislation because it's not up for a vote. They're not preparing to see it in front of them. We're just giving them a heads up that this might be coming. And no one really knows what the legislative process is going to look like in a couple of weeks. The legislature is way out of whack right now. They don't have their normal calendar. They've already started missing deadlines. And so they have to try to come up with a new calendar. We don't know if things will move in a couple of weeks where they normally would take a couple of months. We don't know if this stuff is just going to get punted to the side while they hammer out budget issues, which are huge at this point. We just don't know. We just want to make sure that the message is loud and clear that we oppose AB 828. Now, I do want to get into the details because that 25% reduction in rent gets very complicated. So part A was the moratorium. And if that's the only part that passes, and that was the only thing that this was about, we'd have a problem because now you have every single local jurisdiction in California capable of delaying any action on a non-paying tenant for almost 2 years. The part that's gotten the most attention is the idea that a judge can impose a 25% reduction in the rents on behalf of the tenant and essentially rewrite the lease agreement between tenant and landlord. There's a lot of fine print in this piece of legislation, and I honestly wouldn't be surprised if the tenant groups didn't come out and oppose AB 828. Here's how this works. Right now, if you have an unlawful detainer and you go before the judge, it's contested, and the tenant's there, the end result for the judge is really one of two options. Option A is, landlord, you followed all the proper process. You've demonstrated that they're not complying with the lease by not paying it or some other violation of the lease. So therefore, I am granting the writ of possession. You can take this to the sheriff's office and you'll get a lockout. Option B, especially with the just cause eviction laws that passed and were implemented earlier this year, is the judge says, Mr. Landlord, as I look at this, you have not followed proper procedure. This eviction is not valid. I am ruling that the tenant remains in possession and the lease continues moving forward. This tries to provide for option C. This would be that the judge, after determining that the tenant has faced loss of income or increase in expenses as a result of COVID-19, And if they face a loss of income or increase in expenses between March of this year and March of next year, the judge is to presume that it was caused by COVID-19. Then the judge can impose a 25% reduction in rents that would last for 12 months. So let's give you a scenario, because the fine print to this, I don't think is all that friendly to tenants. So let's imagine a scenario in which a tenant is paying $2,000 a month in rent, and they lost their income in March. So they paid their March rent on the 1st, later in the month lost their income, couldn't make April rent, couldn't make May rent. And let's also imagine a happier world in which everything is back and functioning completely normally on June 1st. The emergency is over, even the courts have rescinded their order, and we're just back to normal in so large sense. So on June 1st, landlord tells tenant, okay, you owe me $6,000. You owe me April rent, May rent, June rent. Tenant says, I don't have it. So landlord says, well, I'm going to have to begin the eviction process. Tenant says, well, I heard about this 25% reduction in rent. I want to try to take advantage of that and request that. So let's say the court system's working swiftly, and 45 days later, they're before a judge on July 15th. And the judge agrees with the tenant, says, yes, you've demonstrated to me your need, your loss of income. And therefore, I'm granting the 25% reduction in rent starting August 1st. So your new rent is $1,500 instead of $2,000 a month through the end of next July. However, the law as written at the moment says that they are to add to that rent 10% monthly of the outstanding rent balance that existed when the judgment was entered. So at this point, July 15th, that's $8,000. 2,000 in April, May, June, and now July. So 10% of that is $800. So tenant, your new rent starting August 1st is $2,300, more than what your actual rent would have been. And actually, it'll be more if you missed at least 3 months of rent, which is going to be a lot of folks if they truly lost income and ability to pay during this time. So I can anticipate your next question. Next question is, okay, well, if they miss a payment in August, I got to start all over again. And they've gotten a deal and they still can't pay, and now we're still looking at a year before I can execute the eviction. Not according to this law. The way this is written, it says that on August 5th, 5 days after the rent's due on the 1st, at midnight, so 12:01 a.m. August 6th, landlord sends a note to the tenant saying, I haven't been paid. I've given you 48 hours notice. Here's my voicemail, text, and email asking you to follow up and send a check. The morning of August the 8th, the landlord, having not received payment, is able to file an action in court declaring that these things have happened, that the judge entered this order, and that you still haven't been paid, and requesting an immediate issuance of a writ of possession. And then, assuming the courts are moving swiftly, that's granted, and you have the fastest eviction in California in 30 years. Middle of August, you're walking over with the sheriff's office and locking the tenant out. That's where I think this gets a lot more complicated.
Wow.
And why I think there'd be tenant groups that would have an issue with it, and some landlords that, if it were possible, might say, I don't know if that isn't an option for me if my alternative is they live rent free for a year during this the court moratorium. Now, the law isn't quite that clear, because while it says that the landlord shall ask for this immediate writ of possession, it does not say that the court shall grant it. It doesn't say anything about what the court should respond to this request. Clearly, the court's able to. So one of the concerns is, is there some level of disingenuous law writing in which this remedy doesn't actually exist? Lucy with the football is going to get pulled away if the landlord tries to act on. So those are some of the concerns. Now, that said, even if the remedy exists, even if all this is possible, it's still a terrible law. It's an arbitrary entry of the court system into the landlord-tenant contract. Not that the judges, the judicial system and the legislature haven't done that on some level, but not like this. Because if the rent request is 25% now, which is a number pulled out of thin air, has nothing to do with affordability. There's not even a sliding scale that says, well, if you lost 80% of your income, you get 25%. Or if you lost 5% of your income, you get 5%. No, it's just 25%. It's an arbitrary figure derived from absolutely nothing that we can see. So if it's a 25% now based on nothing, it could be 30% based on nothing. It could be 40% based on nothing. It could have other provisions, again, based on absolutely nothing. And it is completely silent with regard to any kind of relief that a rental property owner who has obligations, who has a mortgage, who has maintenance responsibilities, and just general bills to pay as a property owner, it is completely silent as to any relief that is offered to that body. And I think it's very important that we stress to the legislature that landlords are not the end of the money chain. They are a middle entity that receives rent from one side and pays it out in bills on the other side. Mm-hmm. And that's something that we really struggled to have policymakers understand.
Yeah, it's just disappointing when I see things like this, because it also causes a lot of, I'm not an attorney, so I'm going to be throwing, contract law. At a national level, when you're dealing with mortgage lenders, that, I just don't understand how any contracts that we've signed on, to your point, on the other end, once the money comes to us and all the things that we owe, the county has already said that they're not going to play ball and allow us to take reductions. Maybe they won't charge us late fees, but unless you get the entire chain to qualify, this is stupid. Right. To me. It's disappointing. I understand, we're in a crisis mode, but it doesn't solve a lot of the problems and leaves so much liability. I'm thinking immediately, you and I had conversed last week about some city having to reverse their stance on, was it a moratorium on evictions at the local level because local landlords were threatening to sue? Is that what it was?
I believe it was on the rent caps.
On the rent caps.
Instituting new ones. Yeah, because it would be outside of what their authority is, actually.
Right, and so the city had to reverse that. So, I just can't imagine across the board that lenders are looking at the state of California, with googly eyes, in love with us. It's just, if they mess this up, it could impact California for much longer than this pandemic period of time.
Yeah, I have a concern about that as well. Mortgages, that are made on real estate are secured loans. But if you remove the ability to act on the security, or to even properly underwrite the loan, because you really have no idea whether these leases, which, at least until recently, I thought were contracts, that bound the parties together. Mm-hmm. If you remove all that, how do you judge the creditworthiness of the borrower? And then if they turn out to be unworthy, you've been locked out of the court system when it comes time to take possession of the property and sell it and try to recover what you have from the security on this loan. I don't know. That starts getting into some pretty tough territory. And there's people have to understand the ecosystem of how money flows on this. You have tenants, working their job, making a wage, paying rent to landlord. Landlord receives it. Landlord pays their bills, including the mortgage, through the servicer that they're paying for the debt on the property. Servicer sends that money along to the bondholders who bought the paper and have it in their portfolio. In many cases, that bondholder is not, the monopoly man somewhere swimming in cash. It's It's CalPERS, it's CalSTRS, it's the pension program with these huge investing instruments that impact a lot of us.
Mm-hmm.
And when CalPERS pension fund underperforms, which it's doing right now, they send a bill to the city, the county, or the water agency, whoever it is they're covering, to make up the difference, which means that there's not money to pay cops on the street, firefighters, teachers with CalSTRS, and the whole thing, recycles right through the system. It's not as simple as let the rich not get their money. It's the pension system that gets impacted, and it's all of us.
Yep.
So.
Exactly. That's why when I see these, it just doesn't seem like it was well thought out, and there's just so many hanging chads that haven't been dealt with. I get it. These politicians are trying to get everybody to the table, and I got to think, was just as to play this a negotiating tool to get everybody to the table? I don't know, but just doesn't deal with all the different players that are involved and doesn't seem sincere.
Yeah, I think they're sincerely trying to help. I think they're also sincerely stepping into something far more painful. They're signing up for a lot of pain for not a lot of benefit, especially, given the way it's currently written, and destabilizing the way housing finance on on investment housing works.
Has any of the national bodies sort of chimed in on this, whether it be the National Association of Realtors or the Mortgage Bankers Association? Have they said anything?
I haven't seen national bodies get involved. Now, National Association of Realtors does not weigh in ahead of the California Association of Realtors. They let the states handle their issues. Now, mortgage brokers, I could imagine a world in which they look at California askance, or really mortgage banks, and then the organizations that back the bondholders, and they have in the past. They weighed in on PACE years ago and said, if you're going to do this, we're not going to back the mortgages, allow you to put new mortgages on those properties and have PACE debt. Now they proposed rulemaking that they would reduce lending availability for any jurisdiction that even has PACE available. So they are willing to weigh in. That's FHFA, which is Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. That's FHA, that's VA. And that's a bunch of other organizations that produce a lot of the lending in the state. So it is possible. This is also, again, it's very, very early in the life of a piece of legislation when it hasn't gone to hearing number one.
Where's your favorite place to go right now for information on this?
As far as California goes, CAR is maintaining a fantastic resource of information. Usually there's stuff behind the membership wall, but they have a website, carcovidupdates.org, that is keeping this information available to anyone who wants to see it. There's webinars on there. They have an FAQ. They update every few days on landlord-tenant issues. They have the 828 information. So I'd recommend that. California Apartment Association also has really good resources right now, including some of the letters they've written on this subject. And that's also outside of their normal membership area. Mm-hmm. So I think the trades organizations are doing a good job of getting information out there. It's available for anybody, whether they're realtors or whether they're members of CAA.
Yeah, no, things are just moving quickly, and it's just hard to believe. Everybody's sort of locked in a room. You sort of forget what's happening. But CAR has been that great resource. That's carcovidupdates.org, and then caanet.org. That's been a good resource, and there's a way to urge a vote no on the California Apartment Association. It's got some easy links so you can send your local senator or state assembly person a message that you oppose the bill. Makes it really easy with links on that page. So anything else that we should know about
CAR,
this?
Just CAR sent out the same thing to its members today. So if someone listening to this is a member of CAR, please check your email. It's a couple of clicks, and you send a note to your senator. It's, again, it's not going to a vote right now, but we want to make sure it's on the radar and our arguments are heard before it gets too much momentum.
Yeah, and just for landlords, just because you're not currently impacted doesn't mean that you won't. So please just get very organized and prepared. Some of these bills coming out are going to make you show demonstration that there's an economic hardship happening, but it doesn't mean that if you can't get proof from a tenant to get them proactive, showing you that you are going to be taking a hit, that maybe you can't get in line for things like the payment protection program or the EIDL program. So just stay engaged, get very organized, document everything to be prepared either way. And stay engaged. I think these associations have done a really good job. And then at your local level, you've got the local associations sending out a lot of information. But if you're out of county and you're not members of those associations, hopefully you have a realtor that's keeping you up to date, because it can really change by the county and the city level. So is there any other thing that you've seen that you're worried about in the legislative space at the local state level?
Well, I'm terrified of what the final economic impact is going to be to government budgets.
Yeah.
Actually, I mean, that's I don't know where that's going to go or what the secondary impacts are going to be. You mentioned earlier that the counties, the state isn't giving any breaks when it comes to property taxes because they have to fund operations. Mm-hmm. What happens when they have deficits and they need to find revenue from somewhere? Are we going to look at proposals with tax increases? Now, I don't think that the voters are going to be very friendly to that sort of thing, but is the push going to be there? I think there's going to be some recommendations along those lines. And, it gets into a blood from a stone scenario here where people don't have income, but they're being asked to part with more of it.
Right. Exactly.
So, yeah, and that's going to be landlords who are going to be asked.
Yep. And it's just frustrating when you've got the state governments and the federal government asking for those kind of cuts on the backs of, this is not anybody's fault, but unless you deal with it systematically, where all parties are involved and we're very organized. I really wish, if nothing else, that the state would stop allowing the local jurisdictions to, it's almost making it worse, and they're not coordinated. And how are you going to coordinate when the localities are doing different things, especially if it impacts contracts that are not California specific? It's just nuts. So, all right. Well, I really appreciate your time coming on and sort of trying to keep us up to date on this. We're recording this at,
Sure.
I'm in Florida. It's 6 p.m., April 23rd, my time, 3 p.m. Western Standard Time. So tomorrow when we post this up, things could absolutely change. We're doing our best to keep everybody up to date, but those local resources are going to probably be your main source. So anything else, Paul?
No, I think that's it. By the way, if anybody out there ever has a question, I'm always available. Aaron, to you, and frankly to anyone listening to this, I like taking calls and hearing what's going on and being able to answer questions if that comes up. Feel free to hand them my email address.
I don't know if you want that out in the net sphere, but maybe, I'll allow them to connect with you on LinkedIn. How about that, Paul Herrera? And they can hunt you down.
Okay.
But thanks for coming on and always being willing to participate in these. It's been really helpful.
Sure. You got it, Aaron.
The Norris Group originates and services loans in California and Florida under California DRE License 012-19911, Florida Mortgage Lender License 1577, and NMLS License 1623669. For more information on hard money lending, go to thenorrisgroup.com and click the Hard Money tab.
For more information on hard money loans and upcoming events with the Norris Group, check out thenorrisgroup.com. For information on passive investing with trust deeds, visit tngtrustdeeds.com.